I'm going to talk you through an image, and then I'll kind of unpack the image, and then we're going to discuss some of the ramifications of it. So I'm just going to talk you through an image, so feel free just to look at me, or you can close your eyes and imagine it as well, so it's up to you. So the image starts off with a stream. So there's this stream running down, and the stream goes all the way to the ocean. So you follow the stream, and it goes on for a long time, and it kind of gets bigger and bigger till it turns into a big river, and then it meets the ocean. So it meets the vast ocean as kind of wide and as deep as you can possibly imagine. And so you've got this stream here, and then on the edge of the stream there's a bank. So there's kind of like a river bank on the edge of it, and on that bank there's a boat. So there's kind of a boat on the edge of this stream, and the thing with this boat is it's a huge, amazing boat that's built to be in the ocean. So I don't really know much about boats, so I can't describe it in that much detail, but it's a boat that's built to be in the ocean, but it's just sat here on the edge of this stream. So you've got the stream going all the way to the ocean with this boat sat on the edge. And it's on a slope, so it could go in, but the problem is that it's tied to the edge. It's tied to the edge of the riverbank with three big thick knots. So there's these three bits of rope, that are kind of knotted together, holding the boat, stopping it from sliding down into the stream. And then so that's the situation we find ourselves in. There's this boat on the edge tied with these three pieces of rope that's stopping it from going into the stream and going out to the sea. So that's the image that kind of we're going to base this on. And I'll kind of talk us through those symbols now. So the boat is basically us. We're the boat in that image. And the ocean, we're the boat, and the edge of the riverbank is the unenlightened mind. Yeah, so the riverbank is the unenlightened mind. That's where we find ourselves. We're the boat with the unenlightened mind. So we're on the edge of this stream. And then the ocean is the enlightened mind. So there's the enlightened mind out there. And the boat is made for the ocean. So our minds, we have the potential for the enlightened mind, but we're stuck in the unenlightened mind. But then there's this stream. So there's this stream that's just next to the boat. It's just there next to the boat. And this stream goes all the way out into the ocean. And what that is in Buddhist terms, there's a term called stream entry, which is a point where it's an irreversible state of definitely getting enlightened, basically. So it's a state, you can get yourself to a state where enlightenment is guaranteed. You're not yet enlightened, but enlightenment's guaranteed. And in the same way, if the boat got in the stream, it wouldn't yet be in the ocean, but the current's so strong, there's no way it wouldn't get there. Yeah, so we're got unenlightened minds. We have the potential for the unenlightened mind. You could say that the enlightened mind is our birthright, but we're not there yet. But the boat is tethered by these three pieces of rope. So there's these three pieces of rope that are stopping the boat from entering the stream. And in Buddhist terminology, these are called the three fetters. So there are three things that are stopping us gaining enlightenment. So there's three things that are stopping us from making the progress towards enlightenment. Yeah. So does that all kind of give you a quick overview? Does that all make sense? Yeah. Nodding heads. Okay. So that's the situation. That's the situation that we find ourselves in. So yeah, the fetters. Traditionally there's three fetters that hold us back, and the reason that they're knotted together is because apparently when you break one, you break them all. So there's three separate fetters, but when you break one, you break them all, and then at that point you then enter the stream. So in the same way, if we could cut the rope that was holding the boat would enter the stream. It would fall down. It would slide down. It would enter the stream, and it'd be out towards the ocean. So what we're going to start off with is we're going to get into, let's get into threes, and we're just going to talk about what do you think your fetters are? What are the things that hold you back from making progress, from living the life you want to live, from having the mind you want to have? What are the things that are kind of holding you back? If you could feel there's a rope tugging on your back, stopping you moving forward, what do you think they are? Yeah, so we're going to get into threes, And yeah, just kind of explore that together. So if you want to find 2 other people around you, we're going to talk for just under 10 minutes. So what we're going to do in the second half, we're going to look at these 3 fetters. So we're going to look at the things that hold us back, but we're also going to look at the positive counterpart as well, that is going to help us transform them, so that we can enter the stream and we can move towards the ocean of enlightenment. So what I'm going to, with what you just talked about, just try and hold them in your mind and see if you can map them onto the things that we explore in the second half. Yes, and then the 3 fetters don't cover everything, but they cover quite a lot of stuff. So yeah. So we'll go and have some tea next door now, and then we'll be back in the second half to fully explore the fetters. So just to recap, so we had the image at the beginning that was the boat on the edge of the stream that was made for the ocean, but it was stuck there on the edge of this stream, and it was tied by 3 knots. I keep saying it wrong. 3 pieces of rope, all knotted together, stopping it from entering the stream to take it down to the ocean. So that's like us. We're stuck with these unenlightened minds. It's possible to get into the stream of the Dharma that would take us all the way to enlightenment, but we're held back by these fetters, by these 3 fetters. They're kind of all linked together. So in a way, it said if we break one, we'd break all of them. So there's these 3 things that are knotted together. And we kind of explored what we thought that held us back. So we talked about what we thought were the things that are particularly holding us back. And what we're going to do now, we're going to look at the 3 fetters individually. And just to say, there are the 3 fetters. There's the 3 fetters that are holding us back, but there's also a positive counterpart, which is the thing that we can cultivate to free us from that fetter. So we've got the fetter, and then we've got I don't have a word for this, but we've kind of got the positive version to help us break the fetter. I don't have a pithy way to say that. So we'll go through them one at a time. So I'm going to do my fancy flip chart. The first one, the fetter is habit. So it's the fetter of habit. And then the way to break that habit is by cultivating creativity. And I've got an image for each of these things as well. So we've got habit, which is symbolized by a wheel. So it's just going round and round the same old thing. And then we've got creativity, which is a spiral. So it's kind of going up higher and higher, developing more and more. So first of all, what we're going to do, if you turn to the person next to you, so let's just do this in pairs. And how do you think that habit holds us back? How does habit hold us back? We'll just talk for a few minutes. So this is the first fetter of habit. How does that hold us back? Yeah, if you just talk to the person next to you. Yeah, so what we're going to do, we're going to explore this under the 3, there's a 3-fold path in Buddhism. There's ethics, meditation, wisdom. So it's kind of like action, working on our mind, and then kind of seeing things as they really are. And we're going to explore these in those different ways. So yeah, looking at habit. So I'm going to start off that we went on a long retreat last year. There's a few of us here went on it. We were up, and it was a retreat up a mountain. And what had happened in the mountain was at the top, there was this path leading down. And when you went down the path, there was suddenly just this huge kind of crater in the path. And it looked like there'd been an earthquake. You know, there's pictures of earthquakes where the earth's kind of ripped apart. When you went down this path, that's what there was. There was this huge kind of like gaping hole in the path. And we kind of like, oh my God, what's happened here? But when we talked about it, what had happened is that there was just a small stream of water that was running down the hill because it had been raining quite a lot. And that would have started off with one small stream of water. But because that stream of water went down, it made a small groove that then had more water go through it. And then more water, and then more water, and then more water, to get to the point where there was suddenly this huge chasm, basically, in the path going down. And that stayed with me so strongly, because I think it's such a good image for what our mind does, basically, is our habits are basically these grooves in our mind. We do something, and it kind of creates a small groove, and then we do it again, and it deepens that groove, to the point where it's easily the path of least resistance. That's just what we go down. So in the same way that the water would go down the groove that had been made to the point where it was the chasm, that's what our minds do. We just go down the path of least resistance, acting out the same things again and again. So that's what habits are, is they're just these grooves in the mind. And so that's habit. And then creativity is the opposite. So if we're trying to break our habits, we need to be cultivating creativity. And this is creativity in the broadest sense. So when we hear creativity, we often think of, say, someone painting or someone making music or dancing or art. But when we say creativity here, we're talking about creativity in the broadest sense. So much more than just creative acts and art. It's kind of acting in a way where we're not locked in our habits. It's kind of a spontaneous acting from a place of positivity and freedom, basically. Because when we're locked in our habits, we're not free. Whereas creativity is a state of freedom. So what we're trying to move away from habit towards creativity. But most of the time, and that's why it's symbolized by the spiral, because that doesn't go around the same old point. It kind of goes upwards and upwards, so it can get higher and higher and more developed. But most of the time, unfortunately, we do act from a place of habit. Pretty much all the time, like you were saying, it's kind of, we don't even realize we're acting from habit a lot of the time because it's just what we do. So that's our primary basis that we're acting from. And we could talk about this as the reactive mind. So it's one of the ways we talk about it is the reactive mind and the creative mind. But in the reactive mind, what happens is that we're just always reacting to the world. So there's external stimulus in the world. Well, we get external stimulus from the world, and then we react to it. So if we experience something pleasurable, we grasp after it, we crave it. If we experience something painful, we push it away. So we're just in this point where we're grasping after things and we're pushing things away, going round and round that cycle, basically. So that's the habit that we find ourselves in, and we can call that the reactive mind as well. I think for me, where I can see that most is with my phone, where if there's even like a tiny bit of discomfort, like a tiny bit of boredom or a tiny bit of something I don't really want to think about, it's just so easy to reach for the phone, isn't it? It's such easy distraction. And I can just see how I don't choose that. It's not like I feel something and I think, okay, how am I going to deal with this? I know I'm going to go onto YouTube. It just, before I know it, I'm on YouTube and I don't even know why. But there would have been some discomfort that's then led me to acting in that way. But we could, so that's one way of acting, but we could move towards a more creative way, a more creative response. And what we need to do there is we need to be aware of feeling as it comes up. In Buddhism, it's called Vedana. It's kind of the feeling tone of our experience. And if we can cultivate awareness to the point where we're aware of the feeling tone in our experience, we're aware of the Vedana, we then can create a bit of a gap where we then have a choice. Yes, the more awareness we have, the more choice we have. So we'll have some unpleasant feeling, and then we think, oh, actually, how am I going to deal with this? Am I going to go and reach for my habitual way of dealing with this, or am I going to do something more creative? But with that, we need to develop more awareness. So that's why meditation is so important, because through meditation, we're then increasing our awareness so that we have more choice. So that's kind of talking about our actions and our ethics. Now I'm going to talk about meditation. So we can also get into habits so easily when meditating. When we meditate, well, at first we won't know what's going to happen, but really quickly we can just get into a routine. Basically, it's kind of about, I know the stages, I know what happens, I know when I do this it leads to this. Oh, I know it doesn't get anywhere. I know blah blah blah. And we can just get into a point where we're just being habitual in that as well. We might go into meditation because we're wanting to do something more helpful, but we can easily just slip into a habit because we think we know how it will go. And I think something that's helpful here with approaching meditation is to think of it less like an exercise. I think quite often when I talk to people when they've started meditating, they quite often use metaphors of a gym, or kind of like going for a run, or some sort of kind of metaphor that is kind of exercise based. And I think there's some benefit in that, because it's kind of, if you go for a run, you'll gradually get fitter. And then it's kind of with meditation, if you meditate, you are going to be working your mind. It'll probably be moving in a positive direction. But actually, I think it's probably more just as helpful, if not more helpful, to think of it more like an art form. So say you were learning the piano, you wouldn't expect to be able to play an amazing piece straight away. You just kind of know that you were kind of learning the basics and know that your experience was going to deepen and you were going to be able to play better pieces and it was going to expand with time. And I think approaching meditation more like an art than exercise leads us more in the direction of creativity, because it leads more to a sense of kind of openness to what's going to happen than if we just think about, it's just my 20-minute exercise kind of thing, if that makes sense. So that's how we can move more in the direction of creativity in meditation. And just one other thing is trying to cultivate what we call beginner's mind. So when people first start meditating, they quite often find that they have really amazing experiences straight away. And then after a while, when they've been meditating, those experiences start to stop. And then they're a bit like, what's happened? But what's happened is basically when people first start meditating, they don't have an expectation of what's going to happen. They don't know where it's going to lead, which means that there's an incredible openness to the experience, which is really conducive to meditation deepening and opening up. So that's why people quite often have those experiences early on. So the more we can try and approach meditation with that fresh mind, that beginner's mind, the more likely we are going to be able to meditate creatively. Yeah, the next thing is around self-view as well. I'm just going to touch on self-view. So we're going to habitually see ourselves in a certain way as well. We'll have a picture of ourselves, mainly unconsciously. We won't realise we do, but we have a picture of ourselves that this is the type of person I am. These are the sorts of things I do. I don't like these situations. I like these situations. We'll kind of have a picture of ourselves. And that's just a habit. In the same way we're talking, but we don't realise we're doing it because it's such a strong habit. We don't realise we have that habit. But the problem is it might not even be accurate to how we actually are. So our view of ourselves might not fit with who we are. So as much as we can, we want to be dropping any idea of what we think we're like to try and see actually what we're like, and also be getting into communication with other people as well to try and get some feedback on, what actually am I like? Because it's often those other people can see us more clearly than we can see ourselves a lot of the time. Yeah, and then finally, from a Buddhist perspective, it's not even that we have habits. We kind of talk in a way of, we have habits, like I have a habit of doing this. But in a way, it's not so much that we have habits, we are a habit. It's kind of, we are just this stream of experience, we're this stream of conditions that is just who we are. It's not so much that we have them, it is just we are the habit. And we also habitually see ourselves as separate from the world. So we have a habit of seeing that we are here, the world is out there. And because we have a habit of separating the world in that way, we feel like we need to protect this. We feel like we need to preserve this, and we feel like we need to enhance it. Yeah, so we're kind of protecting, preserving, and enhancing this thing I think of as me, that's separate from everything out there. And that's what leads to craving, that's what leads to hatred, and that's what leads to this. Well, this delusion is what leads to all of our suffering. So in a way, it's the habits that we have that cause all of our suffering as well. Yeah, so that's kind of a bit about habit and creativity. We'll move on to the next vertebra. Is there any questions on that there? Okay, great. So we'll move on to the next one. A drum roll, please. I don't actually want a drum roll. No, I don't actually want one. That's a joke. Okay. The next one is vagueness to clarity. So vagueness to clarity. Gregor did me some nice clouds here earlier. Thank you, Gregor. So we've got clouds for vagueness, and we've got the sun for clarity. Yeah, so we've got vagueness to clarity. So yeah, so get with someone now. Maybe talk to someone different that you were talking to before, and just talk about how do you think vagueness holds us back? What is it about vagueness that holds us back? Great. Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was kind of just, again, actions. So we can be vague in our actions because, well, basically we're always acting in a way that we're trying to make ourselves happy. Pretty much all the time we're trying to act in a way that we think is going to make us happy. But the problem is that we're not always clear on what is actually going to make us happy. So that's kind of every person on a deep level, that's always why they're trying to act in a certain way. Even if they're doing self-destructive things, on some level, they think that's what they need to do to make ourselves happy. And we're all in that situation. But the problem is we're just not clear on actually what will lead us there and what will be helpful there. So yeah, again, like looking at kind of like binging out on either kind of Netflix or food or something more strong. We kind of want... we want to feel good, don't we? When we binge, we want to feel good, we want some pleasure, but then actually a lot of the time we just feel worse afterwards. Like I know if I've just spent a few hours just watching YouTube, by the end of it I just feel terrible. But it's like I thought that was going to be entertaining and now it's not, kind of thing. But we're always going into things because we think it's going to make us happy, or we want something that's going to make us happy. But we do need to get clear on what actually works. So at that point we're in a state of vagueness as to what actually works. But we need to get clear on what works. And one of the Buddha's teachings is the teaching of karma. So it's that every action has a consequence. So every action we do is going to lead to some sort of result. There's no opting out. There's nothing we can do that isn't going to lead to a result in some way. And then so we can do what we call skillful actions that are going to lead to positive mental states. And there's unskillful actions that will lead to negative mental states. Yeah, so we need to be clear that there are some actions that are going to lead to positive mental states, and there are some actions that are going to lead to negative mental states. And what the Buddha did is he taught us, he laid out precepts which are basically guidance in saying these actions are going to lead to a positive state of mind, these actions are going to lead to a negative state of mind. He's not saying these actions are going to be, these actions are like good and these are bad, or these are sinful, or these are going to send you there. It's as simple as some actions lead to positive mental states, some actions lead to negative mental states. And so there are some actions that he said lead to suffering. So these are harming other people, stealing from other people, harming people through sexual activity, lying, saying hurtful things, gossiping, and polluting our mind with intoxicants. It's kind of like these are all things that are going to have a negative effect on our mind. So we might do these things because we think it's going to make us happy, but all the time it is going to lead to suffering, basically. Those things are always going to lead to suffering. But there are actions as well that we can do that are going to lead to positive states of mind, that are going to lead to happiness. And these are being kind, being generous, cultivating simplicity, cultivating contentment, being truthful, kind, helpful, harmonious in our speech, and cultivating mindfulness, cultivating awareness. All of these things are going to lead to a positive state of mind. And the reason why these are so helpful is because we're then clear on what actually works. It's kind of the Buddha has laid out for us what actually works. We don't have to figure it out for ourselves, because a lot of the time we'll just be in a state of vagueness. We'll be habitually in a state of vagueness, whereas the precepts give us some clarity that can then guide how we act. Now, the precepts don't tell us exactly what that's going to look like in every situation. It doesn't say, because you're in this situation, therefore you need to do this. But they kind of give us a broad guidance for the direction we want our actions to be going in, if we want to be moving in a positive direction. Yeah, now the next bit is similar to what you were talking about, James, is what we call developing a mindfulness of purpose. So this is kind of developing a sense of, I know what direction I'm going in. I know what direction I want my life to move in, and I know what I need to do to move in that direction. And as much as we can, we need to be holding that purpose in our mind as much of the time as possible. So we want to be clear on where we're going, where we want to be going, why we're going there, and how we're going to do it. Yeah, so we're not always going to be able to do that, but as much as possible we want to be cultivating that mindfulness of our purpose. And in Buddhism, so if that's what we're doing, if we're practicing Buddhism, our goal is to develop our mind, to develop our consciousness, to try and become kinder, more aware and wiser. That's the direction we're wanting to go in. So all of our actions, if we're trying to practice Buddhism, want to be aligning with that goal. So we want to be doing things that are going to lead us to being more kind, going to lead us to being more aware and more wise. And we can just be asking ourselves, are the actions that I'm carrying out, is what I'm doing leading me in the direction that I want to be going in? So that's a reflection we can be constantly turning over in our mind. Am I doing the right things to move in the direction I want my life to go in? Yeah, so now moving on to meditation. So it's easy to be vague in meditation as well. It's quite often we can sit down and just be quite vague in what we're doing and then feel like, oh, it's not actually getting anywhere. We can not be clear about what practice we're doing. Quite often if you sit down and you're kind of like, I don't know what practice I'm going to do, you can get to the end of the sit and still be, I'm not sure what practice I'm going to do, and half an hour's gone by. And meditations where I'm not clear on what I'm doing, I can quite often just end up in a bit of a stew and kind of just end up just a bit, well, I think it's just this basically. You can just end up in a bit of a state of that. You can just end up being like, oh, I kind of felt my body, but I'm just a bit, So what we want to do, we want to be clear on what we're doing and why we're doing it. So it might help to bring to mind our mindfulness of purpose. Why am I meditating? Why do I want to meditate? Why do I want to move my life in that direction? And then just kind of commit to the practice that we're doing. So if you're doing the mindfulness of breathing, just commit to the mindfulness of breathing. If we kind of just stay kind of, I don't really know what I'm doing, it can be easy to not really get anywhere. And we also need to just be clear on what's going on in our minds as well. So we do want to commit to the practice, but we also don't want to just transplant the practice over our experience as well. We also need to be aware of what's going on in our mind as we're practicing. So if we're feeling a certain emotion, we want to know, actually, I'm feeling that. If we keep on getting distracted by something particular, we want to know, okay, that's where my mind's going to. So we do need to commit to the practice, but we also need to be aware of what's going on in our experience as we're practicing. And yeah, so as unenlightened beings, we are deluded. And the Buddha doesn't kind of mince his words. He's kind of like, unenlightened beings are deluded. But that's not our fault. That's just the state. That's the state of the unenlightened mind. And it just means that we're not seeing clearly, basically. Kind of when the sun's out, when the sky's clear, we can see clearly. We're just not seeing clearly. It's not that we're bad. It's not that we're sinful. We're just not seeing things how they actually are. And we misinterpret our experience. So we have experiences, but we just misinterpret them, and we have wrong views about them. And it's the negative mental states that we have that cloud our vision. So if we have a positive state of mind, often we're seeing much more clearly. It's negative states of mind that cloud our mind and kind of lead to this more vague state of mind. So if we can be cultivating awareness and cultivating positivity with the mindfulness of breathing and with the metta bhavana, we are going to see things much more how they really are. Yeah, and the last thing is this: if we're trying to practice the Buddha's teachings, we do also need to be clear on those teachings as well. I think a lot of the time it's easy to just have a vague idea of Buddhism, I think it's really easy to kind of hear things a few times, kind of have an intuitive response of, oh, I think that's true, and then kind of think we get it. But actually, we can go for quite a long time having quite a vague idea of what the Buddha actually taught. And having an intuitive response, having like an emotional response to them is really important. But it's also important that we get clear on the teachings as well, that we get clear in what's going on. And Buddhism teaches that there's 3 levels of reflection to really get the teachings kind of down into our bones. So the first one is hearing the Dharma, so hearing the teaching of the Buddha. So that's the first stage, is we need to encounter the teachings. So whether that's kind of hearing people talking about it, whether that's reading a book, whether that's kind of listening to talks at home, we need to just hear it. We need to be encountering the Buddha's teachings on just an intellectual level. We need to hear them. The next is we need to be reflecting on them. So once we've heard teachings, we need to then be reflecting on it and trying to see it in our lives. So for example, impermanence. So it's very easy to hear impermanence and think, oh yeah, things are impermanent. But actually we're not then seeing the world in that way. We aren't seeing the world through the lens of impermanence. So it is going to take some effort to try and remind ourselves to spot it when it's happening. If something happens in our life where something we're attached to gets taken away from us, rather than distracting ourselves, we can then turn towards the Dharma, we can turn towards the Buddha's teachings and reflect on impermanence actually in our lives. We can see, oh yeah, this is happening in my life, that is true. And with time, we'll see it more and more to the point where we'll be convinced, oh yeah, these teachings are the truth. And then finally, there's meditating on the teachings, or kind of meditating on the Dharma, which is when in states of deep meditation, you drop in the teachings. And what this does is, because you're in a state of deep meditation, the teachings just sink in at a much deeper level to the point where they are kind of changing the way you see the world. So yeah, this hearing the Dharma, reflecting on the Dharma, and then meditating on the Dharma. And this is basically going from encountering the teachings and understanding on an intellectual level to the point of really deeply knowing the teachings, and that being the lens that we see the world through. Yeah, so that's kind of the ultimate clarity there, is just knowing the Dharma from the deepest level, and that's just the way they see the world. That's kind of the highest point of clarity. And then we'll finally get to the third fetter, which is superficiality to wholeheartedness. So we've got superficiality to wholeheartedness. Now these ones were the hardest ones to draw. So this here is a puddle, and this here is an ocean. So we've got a shallow puddle for superficiality, and then we've got a deep, infinite ocean for wholeheartedness. So yeah, so just turning to someone next to you and talking about how does superficiality hold us back. With, yeah, I like this image. I think this is kind of like, for me, this feels like one of the most evocative. I can kind of feel it. If I imagine a puddle compared to an ocean, I can just feel it. So there's kind of, we can let the images speak for themselves as well. But I think, so most of the time, we're not integrated, or we're not unified enough to be wholehearted. And because we're not integrated, because we're not unified, we're being pulled in these different directions, which then stops us being able to fully be wholehearted in what we're doing. And that stops us from being able to fully commit to things. It stops us being able to really fully commit and engage with the whole of our being. It leaves us emotionally conflicted. So even when we're doing something, there's part of us that thinks we shouldn't be doing it or wants to be doing something else. And that leaves us doing things kind of on the surface. It kind of leaves us on the surface of our experience, because there's so much conflict going on. We can't actually go deeper, and we can't engage more fully. And it means we're not putting the whole of our being into what we're doing. But actually one of the problems is that actually just not doing something wholeheartedly is just painful. It's intrinsically painful to not do something wholeheartedly. And we can sometimes feel like we're getting away with it because we're kind of half doing something, but actually we're always just doing it. We're making it worse for ourselves by not doing it wholeheartedly. I remember I was a primary school teacher before, and we used to have to do these kind of online Zoom trainings that were just like the worst thing ever. Not that was an exaggeration, but they were pretty dull. And for quite a lot of it, me and the people I was doing it with, we kind of did it maybe like 15%. We'd kind of be doing other stuff. It would be on. We weren't really engaging. And it would just be so unpleasant. It would be so uncomfortable. And at one point I was like, I'm actually just going to try just fully doing the training. And then so one day I just fully did the Zoom training. And it was a bit boring, but it was actually fine. And so it was interesting looking, so my resistance was making me kind of half do it, or probably not even half, but I really wasn't engaging with it, and it caused me so much suffering. Whereas actually when I was like, I don't want to do this, but I'm just going to fully do it, it was actually much more pleasant. But we can kind of think that we're winning by not really engaging with things, whereas actually we're just making ourselves suffer. So something about doing something wholeheartedly, even if it's not necessarily something that we choose to do, but doing it wholeheartedly is much more satisfying than kind of half doing things or doing things on a surface level. Yeah, another example is cleaning. I really don't like cleaning. But actually, when on retreat, and I've kind of, at the end of a retreat, there's a cleaning period. But because I've been on retreat and I've kind of cultivated some awareness and cultivated some more kind of like unification, actually I can really enjoy cleaning. But it is just the kind of being on the surface and actually wanting to do something else that makes it much more unpleasant. Yeah, and with meditation, we can also just always be staying on a superficial level. And this kind of, it fits, I think we're saying all of these are linked, but it fits with habit and vagueness as well. But if we're going through the motions with meditation, we can just kind of stay on the surface of our experience and never actually get anywhere, or not actually be transforming some of the deeper parts of ourselves. Because to go more deeply into meditation, we'll actually need to turn towards our experience. We need to turn towards what's going on in our mind and in our whole experience. And normally, if we're staying on the surface, it's because there's some discomfort that we don't want to experience. There's some unpleasantness in our experience. Maybe it's an emotional thing, maybe it's a physical thing, maybe it's just kind of some sort of mental conflict. And we just don't want to turn towards it. And because we don't want to turn towards it, we just stay on the surface of our experience. And that stops us deepening in our meditation. But other times it will be that we're just actually more interested in doing something else. It's kind of like, I've sat down to meditate, but actually I want to be going and watching the next show and that thing I want to do, or I want to be out doing this or doing that. But I think it's important just to not fall for those things that they're actually going to be more satisfying. Because actually, if we can turn towards our experience, it's always deeply satisfying. So it's kind of like not buying into the, oh, if I was doing this, it would be much better. And yeah, we just want to stop staying on the surface. And what can help with that, again, it's kind of, this is showing how these are also linked together. But if we reflect on our motivation for why we want to meditate as well, so it's the same, if we can bring to mind the mindfulness of purpose, that will be able to lead us to get more deeply into our meditation and get more of our emotions on board with the act of meditating. Because often it's because our mind kind of thinks it's a good thing to do, but our emotions aren't behind it. So the more we can reflect on, oh, this is why I'm doing it, the more we'll get our emotions on board. And yeah, there's states in meditation where we get concentrated. They're kind of very deep states of absorption, which are called jhanas. And these are basically where our mind's completely unified. All of our energies are unified to the meditation. And these are kind of deeply kind of pleasant and healing and nourishing states of mind that we can get into, which in themselves have a really positive effect. But also in these states of mind, we can then start turning towards the Dharma, start reflecting on the Dharma, and transform ourselves on those deeper levels. And that's kind of the aim of the wholeheartedness, is we're wholehearted in our meditations so we can transform all of ourselves. Yeah, and when we first hear the Buddha's teachings, we might have a strong response to them. There might be a strong sense of, yeah, this is definitely true. This is something I want to move towards. But there will also still be doubts. It's kind of part of the path is kind of encountering our doubts and transforming our doubts that will kind of stop us engaging more, stop us practicing more, stop us going deeper into our experience. But as we practice the Dharma, as we keep practicing the Buddha's teachings, we'll start to experience the fruits of the practice more and more firsthand. So it will become less and less like, oh, I've read that this is what happens, or I've read this is the way things are. And more that you actually see how things are and you actually experience the fruits of practice for yourself. And at that point, the doubts don't have anywhere to cling to, because you know from your own experience that these things are true, that the practices work. And with that, we're becoming more and more wholehearted, because we really know that the practices work. So the doubts start to dissolve, and that kind of has a positive feedback loop. So it's kind of because we've experienced it, we then can have less doubts. So we practice more fully, and because we're practicing more fully, there's more effect. So then the doubt is dissolved even more, and it kind of has this positive effect where the more we practice, the more we can see it's true, the more we want to practice, and it will just get more and more, and we'll build more and more momentum. So yeah, I think as we've talked, hopefully you can see that these things all link together. So by working on our habit and moving it towards creativity, we can then work on our vagueness and transform that towards more clarity. And we can work on our superficiality and cultivate it more towards wholeheartedness. And yeah, kind of the point of this is to try, and these are the things that are going to stop us from really engaging and really practicing. So when we break the fetters of habit, vagueness and superficiality, it isn't that we'd be enlightened, it's just that there would be nothing to stop us. So it's kind of like at the point where you break the fetters, there's no obstacles towards your mind moving in that direction. So the more we can cultivate creativity, the more we can cultivate clarity, the more we can cultivate wholeheartedness, we're removing the obstacles, so our mind's going to naturally move towards more wisdom, more compassion, more awareness. So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get our mind so we can enter that stream and then kind of enter the ocean that is the enlightened mind.